3, 2, 1. Мы онлайн.
Okay, so can I start?
Yes.
Okay. Dear Franz, I am really glad to meet you again in Russia, although this time your visit is virtual, unfortunately for me. I would be really glad to have you in live here. Maybe in Russia, I am one of the oldest fan of your books, as I started with your Chimpanzee Politics, which was published in 1982. Hierarchy and aggression are among the topics you are actively discussing in your books and investigating in your lab. What is aggression? Is it an integral feature of human nature?
Aggression is when you intend to harm somebody else or threaten to harm somebody else. Yeah, that's of course a very general animal characteristic. Many animals, from insects to mammals and primates, they show aggression. I've always been more interested in the other side of aggression, is like how they get over it, how they, and actually you're interested in that too, how they reconcile afterwards and how they maintain their relationships despite all the conflict. So that's actually a bigger interest for me, because aggression is visible everywhere and looks very similar everywhere. It's always, it can get very harmful, and that's why it's important to deal with it.
Yeah, but in humans, do you think that this is inevitable for humans to be aggressive?
Yeah, I think humans will always be aggressive. The society can regulate how much aggression there will be. That depends on the structure of the society, the education that the children receive, the rules of the society. So I think it fluctuates. There are some societies that are quite aggressive and some that are quite peaceful. So culture has a big effect on it, but aggression will always be there somehow. Yeah.
Franz, you're one of pioneers in the field of conflict resolution studies in animals. Reconciliation, consolation, third-party interaction in conflicts. Are humans unique in their peacemaking potential? How would you summarize the main results obtained in this field?
Yeah, I think humans are not unique. We often think that forgiveness, which is related to reconciliation, is a uniquely human. Sometimes it's even claimed as uniquely Christian. I think that's nonsense. Many animals, and not just the primates, also elephants, dolphins, wolves, many animals who live in social settings, they may have a fight and then later they come together and they make up somehow. In chimpanzees, it's with kisses, like in humans, maybe. In bonobos, it's with sex. In other species, it's licking or grooming, which means that they can move from hostility to to a more friendly interaction, which is a very interesting transition, that they can do that. And many social animals are able to do that. And so I don't think human peacemaking is unique. Sometimes, of course, when it occurs between groups or nations, like one country with another country, then it gets very complex, and I think that's uniquely human. But the basic process within the family or between friends, I think, is very similar.
But probably you were the one initiating the discussion about consolation, and the debates were what should be the level of cognition which would allow the species to express or to demonstrate consolation. Formerly, it was considered that probably only humans or probably some great apes are able to do so. But I know that now we change our approach.
Yeah, with consolation, which I think is closer to empathy. So reconciliation is when two parties who had a fight come together. Consolation is when, for example, someone has lost a fight and others come over and calm them down and groom them and embrace them. And very similar in humans also, consolation behavior. Consolation and empathy, people thought that was uniquely human. And that's because psychologists, I don't know, you're an anthropologist, you're not a psychologist.
Sure,
right?
I am an anthropologist, yes.
But I think psychologists, they always like to work at the highest cognitive level. So their image of empathy was very cognitive, very complex, like taking the perspective of somebody else, imagining how somebody else feels. And so in their mind, an animal, like let's say a rat or a dog, could not have empathy. It was impossible because it was so complex for them. Now we think very differently about empathy, partly because of the studies on animals. We even have studies in rodents now on empathy, because we think empathy is basically the capacity to be sensitive to the emotions of somebody else, to be affected by the emotions of somebody else. And your average dog has that already, of course. Many social animals have that. And so now we have a different view of empathy at a much more basic level. And yes, there is sometimes this complexity in humans. So for example, in humans, we have perspective taking, but in many animals, that's maybe not the main part of empathy.
Yeah. But how about macaques, for example, or other monkeys? Do they have this behavior? Do they possess consolation? Because a few years ago, we published a paper with Lotte Hemmelreich demonstrating that probably consolation could arise out of the close distance from each other, although we demand some certain level of cognition. But still, even in Macaca tonkiana could be observed some features of consolation.
Yeah, there are macaques who show consolation. Capuchin monkeys do it. Yeah. So there are some animals like baboons, for example, some primates, where it's very hard to find, and probably it doesn't exist. I'm surprised by that, because you would think that, for example, mothers with their offspring, if the offspring is distressed, they should receive it and calm, like all mothers do all over the world in humans. So I'm a bit surprised that there may be some species where it doesn't happen, but I think in most primates it is a common behavior.
Yeah, should be. In your book, you are talking a lot about distinction between two closely related species, common chimpanzees and bonobo. What is special about bonobo? Because they are very popular nowadays. Are they really more peaceful and tolerant compared to chimpanzees? Do you think that bonobo may be more suitable as a model for human distant relatives, similar to Ardipithecus romidus and others?
Yeah, so the bonobo looks like a chimpanzee, is a bit smaller and a bit more elegant. And in the old days, long ago, people confused the two species, and they were all considered the same sort of thing. And in zoos, they were housed together. Now we know that bonobos are a different species, and they behave very, very differently. Because the bonobos, first of all, they use sex to resolve problems between them, which the chimpanzees don't do so much. And the females are very bonded. The females have a sisterhood, very strong bonds between the females, which are also sexually maintained. And as a result, the females have become dominant over the males. So it's a male-dominated, very peaceful, very sexy species. And not everyone is happy with that. So there are anthropologists who don't like that. The anthropologists have always emphasized warfare and aggression, and how we humans, we became the dominant species because we killed everybody else, including the Neanderthals. And so when they hear about bonobos, they become nervous, because bonobos are female dominated and peaceful, and the anthropologists don't like them. But the general public loves them because they show an alternative universe, so to speak, than the chimpanzee, which is very male dominated and very aggressive and violent. So the difference in violence is enormous. There was a recent article on lethal aggression, so deadly aggression in the wild, not in captivity, in the wild, in chimpanzees and bonobos. And it found 152 cases in the chimpanzee observed in the wild, and one case, maybe, was not even sure, one case of suspected lethal aggression in the bonobo. So the bonobo is a much more peaceful species. And I think it's very interesting. You ask, do we humans have more in common with the bonobo than with the chimpanzee? I think there's often wishful thinking in that, when people say we are more like bonobos. I think that they may be gay or they may be feminists because they really want to be like bonobos. I would always say we are equally close to bonobos and chimps, exactly equally close. So in my mind, they're exactly equally relevant, and we should look at both. We have something in common with both. We have some of the aggressiveness in common with the chimpanzee, and the male dominance in common with the chimpanzee. But the bonobo is a much more empathic and a much friendlier and a more female-centered species. And we have that probably in common with them as well. And so I think we should look at both of them and make a triangular comparison.
Why so? Probably this is because bonobo and chimps are sister species, because they differentiate much later, after we and their line differentiated from common ancestor. Maybe this is a reason. So no any need to see which one of them or to discuss which is closer to us. Yeah,
they're equally close. Yeah.
Yes, but in any case, do you think that animals can possess any sort of concept of morality?
Yeah,
maybe you can present a few examples of morality in chimps.
Yeah, I'm not sure they have a concept of morality. That's a big statement. But many elements of morality we can see in other species. And so I'm very interested in empathy, for example.
Yes, I know.
So the Dalai Lama, for the Dalai Lama, morality is completely empathy. Empathy is the core. Compassion and empathy are the core of morality. For other people who follow, let's say, Immanuel Kant, these philosophers, for some of these philosophers, the core of morality is reasoning and logic. So it's not necessarily empathy. So there are differences of opinion. But I would argue that human morality could not exist without empathy. Empathy is that you are interested in somebody else, you're interested in the well-being of somebody else. And so I think empathy is absolutely essential. And that's something you can find in other species, like in the mammals. Another thing that is essential is a sense of fairness and justice and reciprocity and working together and solidarity. That's all part of human morality. You are part of the group and you need to contribute to the group. That's part of human morality. And that can be found in other species as well. So we do experiments on the sense of fairness in monkeys, for example. So we give them different rewards for the same task, and we see how upset they get by that. So that's inequity. And that can be found in other animals as well. And so I think some elements of human morality, they are not our invention. They come from long ago, from our primate background. Some other elements, yeah, if you think about justifying your moral decision, yeah, that's a typical human thing to do. So some elements of human morality are uniquely human, but not all of it.
Can you give some examples? How do chimps show their empathy and compassion to conspecifics, just for people who are not working with primates to have an idea?
Yeah, so a typical example in chimpanzees, the typical behavior is what we call consolation, is that one chimpanzee has lost a fight, has been screaming, sits in the corner, and others come over and put an arm around him or groom him or try to calm him down. So that's consolation behavior, but sometimes it's much more complex. So for example, we had in our group, we had a very old female who was very popular, but she could not walk very well anymore, and she was almost blind also. And in the last years of her life, the group supported her. And so, for example, if she would walk to the water faucet to drink, which was a long distance because it's a very large enclosure, younger females would run to the water faucet and suck up water and bring it to her and spit it in her mouth, so that she didn't need to walk that whole distance. Or if she tried to climb into a frame where other chimps were grooming, the younger females would push her up because she couldn't climb very well. And so she was helped very much in her old days. And she was certainly not able to repay the favors. So this was all done pro bono, so to speak. And that kind of empathy is also visible. So Empathy is visible in food sharing, is very visible between mother and offspring, of course, and I think that's actually the origin, that's the original context of it, mother to offspring. But it's visible in many relationships, also between males. For example, the alpha male, a good alpha male, but we also have sometimes bad ones, but a good alpha male, he consoles parties. If there's a big fight in the group, first of all, he tries to break up the fight and stop it, but he also consoles and embraces and calms everybody down. And a good alpha male is very good at that. And he's also very empathic.
Franz, you have been working with chimps and other primates for many years. Have you ever a feeling that there is a close attachment to some of individuals from your side, and were animals expressing also their empathy in your direction? So were there some favorites among them?
Well, I've had quite a few favorites, yeah. So in my last book, I described Mama, the chimpanzee, who was very important in the Arnhem colony, a very central figure. For 40 years, she was alpha female, which is unusual because in the males are alpha male for maybe 4 years or 5 years. And then there's usually another male who takes their position. But she was for 40 years the head of the female band. And she was a very central figure, and she was very good friends with me. And so if I would come to the zoo, which I did maybe once every year or once every 2 years, she would immediately recognize me among all the visitors, and she would greet me and try to get close to me. I would never go in with her, but we would groom each other through the bars and things like that. So Mama was one of them, but I've had many individuals that I knew very well and that either liked me or I liked them. There's also sometimes individuals who hate you. I've never had much antagonism from my chimpanzees, but sometimes, for example, we had one time a young male in a group of chimps at Yerkes where I work. We had a 12-year-old male chimpanzee who's adolescent. And I got a new student who was a young man, and he saw this young man as competition. And he always would throw things at him and was very angry that because many of the people who work with me are women, and now all of a sudden there was a young man and he didn't like that at all. And so that happens sometimes also with the chimpanzees, is that they hate somebody. And it's usually males hating a male or females hating a woman. That's usually how it goes, because it's always within gender that the tensions exist.
So this is a sort of interspecies interactions and jealousy, and so to say. And so do you think that, for example, in your case, that animals include you somehow in their group and were treating you as part of their community?
Yeah, that's interesting that you asked that, because I've always, as a scientist, I always try to stay outside. And I try not to get too close to my animals because we do experiments with them, well, behavioral experiments, but still, I want to be neutral. I want them to ignore me, basically. But I had an office. For 25 years, I had an office that overlooked a whole group of chimpanzees. And they considered me part of their territory. They considered me part of their group because I was very often there. Yeah. I would just be sitting there working and they would be doing their things. And I still remember that we once had once I came to my office after some absence, and the whole window was full of mud. The whole window was dirty. And I said, how is that possible? What happened here? And then I heard that some strangers, some workmen, they had entered my office and worked there, and the chimps had thrown mud at the windows. Yeah. So the chimps considered these people intruders, and chimps can be very hostile to intruders. So they wanted to get rid of them, and something that they never did with me. I was just part of their group, basically. Yeah, so these things happen, is that they look at you differently than the rest. Yeah.
Oh, this sounds very nice and also similar to my experience. So, as an ethologist, I follow the principle that you have to be at least in a distance, but as a person, it's very complicated to do so. So, in any case, with years, when you interact with same groups of monkeys, in my case, these were macaques, you always have some personal preferences, so to say. Some
Yeah.
like you or dislike you. Yeah, I exist. I understand this feeling, and that's why probably the monkeys are missing you a lot now.
I retired a year ago, and so I'm not going so often anymore. And of course, some of the chimpanzees are very old, and some of them have died. So because we're not breeding new chimpanzees, and so they're getting older. But some of them I've known for a very long time, and yeah, they certainly will recognize me if I go back now. Yeah.
Do animals have long time memories? Do they remember their childhood, for example, or those with whom they were interacting many, many years ago?
Yeah, it's interesting that you ask, because there's a field called time travel. So people study if animals can think ahead or can think back.
Mm-hmm.
And people used to say, this is like 10 years ago, people would say, no, time travel requires that you have language. You have to have language to think forward and to think backward.
Yes.
We don't think that anymore, because there are now beautiful experiments on birds, birds with large brains like the corvids, or on primates, that show that they can think forward, they can think ahead, but they can also think backward. They can think back to very specific events. And they do experiments. I have not done them, but others have done experiments where you create a certain situation, and 2 years later, you bring the chimpanzee in the same situation to see if they remember specifically what happened then. And they do. So so that's called episodic memory. So the time travel literature is very interesting, because people used to claim that as uniquely human. There are many of these claims about what is uniquely human, and most of these claims have not held up very well. Most of the claims about what makes humans unique are forgotten by now. So, but they were made one time. Yeah.
Maybe then it will be interesting for you that a few years ago we were talking with Hadza people. Hadza are hunters. I just explained for audience. Hadza are hunters gatherers, which are still practicing this tradition in Tanzania. And some anthropologists before that claimed that probably they are only thinking about here and now and never. Yes, which is very strange. These were anthropologists, and in the past it was quite popular view. So we targeted this question, and we were precisely talking to people, trying to find if it is really so. Do they think about what will happen to them in the future, and do they think about distant past? And we published quite recently a paper on that issue. Of course, they do. So now, as you say, even primates do so, at least apes. So it was really strange why this idea was so popular in some time within anthropologists.
Well, it's amazing how Western people can be so arrogant. Incredibly
because they
arrogant.
think that they are the smartest, the best in terms of civilization, and they can dictate everything, and they can preoccupied with idea that what are they doing other people are not able to do at all, or never even approach.
I see the same thing when anthropologists talk about the Neanderthals. They talk about them as if they must be totally retarded and stupid, like idiots. But the Neanderthals, they had brains that were larger than our brains, and obviously they could do all the things that we do. I don't know why they disappeared. There may be just an immune system. It doesn't, maybe nothing to do with their intelligence. But they talk about the Neanderthals, and so there is this arrogance in the West, And that's also shown towards animals. So the people are very convinced that an animal cannot plan ahead.
Yes.
But now we have all these experiments that they actually do. Yeah.
Yeah, I am glad that you managed to do so. Since Charles Darwin, it was accepted by evolutionary scientists that humans share basic emotions with animals. I guess that you support this idea, right? If yes, how then would you estimate the current trends in cultural anthropology to deny the possibility of adequate reading and understanding of emotions of representatives of distant countries? If you were traveling worldwide, and you do a lot in your life, was it a problem for you to read the basic emotions of local people? Of course, as a highly qualified ethologist, you are equipped with better knowledge than ordinary individuals. This makes you expertise both more professional as well as more privileged at the same time. So how would you say?
Yeah, it's an interesting, Paul Ekman, the psychologist, he lived in a time that the anthropologists claimed that the emotional expression is culturally variable, and so each culture is different. And Paul Ekman, the psychologist, he went around the world with a set of photographs and showed people photographs of smiling and laughing and crying. And he would ask what it means. And he found that there were several expressions, 6 expressions, I believe, that were universal, that everyone everywhere understood what they meant. And we now have the idea that the expression of the emotions, like Darwin said, is a species characteristic. It's not a cultural characteristic. It's something of our species. And many of these expressions are very similar to what the primates do. So a chimpanzee smiles also. Sometimes it's more nervous than in humans. So the meaning is a bit more nervous than in humans, but it has the same appeasement effect. Smiling is an appeasement behavior. And so it's so in the apes and in humans. And so humans have universal emotional expressions, so you can study them. And of course, you can recognize them. If you go to a country where you've never been, let's say you go to Japan or China, and you will know very quickly if someone is angry at you or friendly to you. That's very easy to see. We don't need a book for that. We can just see these things. And so the expression of the emotions is a universal human behavior. It's what we would call, in ethology, we call it the fixed action patterns. That's what they are. So you're born with them. And there's actually studies by Eibel Eibesfeld who showed that children who are born deaf and blind, so who have never experienced these expressions at all, they still show the same expressions as other children. And so they're really they're an instinctive part of our human species.
Thank you very much. In your Mama's last hug, you are disputing with Steven Pinker's thesis expressed in his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, who is convincing that our civilization and control or have control of our instinct is the only way for the peaceful future of mankind. According to Professor Pinker, the initial biological nature has been gradually substituted by civilization in the process of humanization, as if our ancestors, as well as currently existent non-literate cultures, are brutal, violent, in contrast to modern industrial groups. I am sure that our audience would be interested to hear your point on this view and this traditionally debated issue.
Yeah. The most violent people are sometimes the most civilized people. So I don't see civilization as the big wall against violence, because if you look at how the Western powers, when we started to colonize the world, which is like 200 years ago, when we became colonists, we were extremely violent. So I don't believe that civilization brings peace. I don't think that at all. I don't think, and what Pinker means by civilization is Western civilization, or let's say Chinese civilization. He doesn't mean people who live in small scale societies. That's for him not civilization, which is already completely wrong in my mind to think that way. So first of all, that's the problem, is that he thinks civilization brings peace, but also his thesis requires that you start out very aggressive, that our species was very aggressive to begin with. And that's why he believes that the chimpanzee is the best model for human behavior. He doesn't think about the bonobo, which is a very peaceful species. I think it's very well possible that humans were very peaceful for a very long time. And that only with the agricultural revolution, when we settled down and we got land and we got possessions, that only then became more aggressive and we started to wage war. There is no evidence for warfare that goes back further than 12,000 years. There's no evidence. And so people may have been killing each other on occasion, but I don't think they were necessarily waging war. And so this whole idea that we have always been highly aggressive and that only when civilization came, we became more peaceful. Yeah, I think it's total nonsense. I think we should think about the bonobo as a potential ancestral type too. And if you think about the bonobo, then maybe the aggressiveness of the human species is more exceptional and is more recent than you would think.
But even if we, for example, analyze the behavior of Hadza as one of the groups of hunters-gatherers remained now and living parallel with us, so to say, in our world. Of course, they are both aggressive and they are friendly, because the previous view of my colleagues, anthropologists, may not be correct as well, because as you know, that Richard Lee and some other people try to show them as if they're absolutely ideal society without no conflicts, without no physical aggression or so, but this is not correct as well. So meaning that they have a balance of both aggression and ability to be highly affiliative, friendly, and humorous, and so on. Many years when in 2003, I first approached them and I was invited to one of their groups. At that time, there were practically no tourists, so they were really, really traditional. I was impressed how smart they are, how basically philosophical they are, and how they can, for example, specify their questions for me, asking about our civilization. And so they were really nice in that. And each time now I'm coming back, and this is for many years, I have close friends there, and I can feel how happy they are that I am back there. Although I witnessed a couple of times a lot of very uncomfortable quarrels, but I would say that majority of these quarrels were because they were starting drinking alcohol. So these people are really, really very, very timid and nice, but as soon as they start drinking, they cannot control each other and or themselves as well, and they become really violent to each other and even can kill each other. So probably there is nothing to do with particular economic stage, but rather whether there is a tradition to consume alcohol in this group and to have a sort of prescriptions how this alcohol can be used and in which time and with whom this can be used. So this is also possible.
Yeah, no, so I'm very glad that my chimpanzees don't drink alcohol.
Probably you remember the paper by McGrew, who was following the situation when chimps started consuming alcohol, which were brewing by local people.
Oh, I don't know. That was probably not so good.
This was really tricky.
Sometimes they eat fermented fruits, you know?
Yes, but also as elephants do, figs.
Yeah, when animals eat fermented fruits, I don't think they become violent. They become disoriented, you know?
Yeah, in the case of chimps, they still simply try to drink as much as possible, and then they hardly manage to get down from the tree and then sleep on the surface, and that's it. But no violence. In the case of people, we did observe this, and this is really uncomfortable, and I think it's fearful because to people themselves, this is uncomfortable because they are not adjusted to this kind of behavior and quarrels and so on. But Franz, now we are living in the rapidly changing world, in the era of internet and rapid development of artificial intelligence. It is time to think of humans in terms of rational and emotional perspective of our cognition. How important is our emotional intelligence today? Or it is something atavistic?
Well, it's interesting. Today we are talking over internet virtually, and of course many people have virtual contacts now. It's interesting that we used to, in the West, we used to say that Facebook and social media were bad things, and now we are using them all the time because we need connections in this time of the pandemic. So it's interesting that how our old primate tendencies to have contact with each other, they are still there, and we fill them in with the means that we have nowadays. What I think about the current time is interesting, is that we live in a time of the pandemic, and we live in a time of climate change, and we've seen the fires in Australia and the fires in California. Everything is with the world, with the climate, is going wrong in a way. And I think we live in a time where we should reflect on our relationship with nature. I look at Western philosophy. Western philosophy has done a very bad job, has emphasized very much the difference between humans and other species, has made humans into something special. We are not animals, we're something else. And as a result, we now live in a world which is going wrong. We are being defeated by a little virus that has taken over the world. We're being defeated by people who have eaten bats, which is probably not a good thing to do. And so we need to reflect on our relationship with nature. And I think something is going to change after this pandemic. I think people realize that our place in the world is different than we thought. And hopefully Western philosophy will follow, because the philosophers, I think, are major contributors to this idea that we are separate from the natural world. So that's sort of the bigger picture that I see after this pandemic.
Okay, there is a note for me from conveners, but Galia, let us continue a bit, and then we will try to deal with your questions. But how do you think, because this is really important issue about this pandemic, everyone is preoccupied with broadcasting, what will happen next, and whether our world was really changed after that. Do you think that people will become more friendly to each other and more tolerant to each other after pandemic, or there will be no change?
Oh, I don't know that. I do think when the pandemic started here, people had these very negative views. They would say, we're going to live in a world where everyone kills everybody, sort of Darwinian world, is people will turn against each other. And that hasn't really happened, in the sense that many people have been supportive of each other and have been supporting old people or people who were sick. So the idea that the pandemic would bring bad behavior hasn't really worked so well. I'm not sure that it's bringing good behavior. That's your question, is will we improve our behavior afterwards? I'm not sure. We will go back to some regular life, I think, of traveling and restaurants and working. But I think something has changed. For example, I noticed that in this country, I don't know if that's true in Russia, people are talking more about should we be eating meat so much as we do, or should we treat animals, or should we treat nature better than we do? And I think people are thinking now about these issues a bit differently than before. So I think that there will be a shift in perspective, maybe.
And one more question about personal interactions, because you see, when I was teaching offline, in a small period, before we skip again to online teaching. And my students share their opinion about their previous spring period of isolation. And they say that although we are adjusted to Facebook and so on, internet interactions with each other, but now we understand that probably the older generation was correct saying that it's not enough for people. We need tactile contact with each other. We need to see each other in person, not via internet. So probably our generation, they say, is not so different than your generation to this extent. How about your thinking?
Yeah, no, that's true. Is that digital contact is not the same as it may. We humans, for example, we are affected by pheromones. People don't realize that, but we are affected by chemical substances that float around. They have a very important function in sexual relations, but they have also an important function in all relations. I remember one time I was on an airplane to Tokyo with a businessman. I was sitting next to the businessman, and he was flying all the way to Tokyo for one meeting. I said, do you really need to go all the way? Because that's a 16-hour flight just for one meeting. Could you do it maybe over internet? And he said, no, I want to smell the people. I want to see them sweat. I want to hear their discussions outside of the meeting. And so he was explaining to me how important it is to have physical contact with people. And I think we often underestimate that, is that we see, when we're up close, we hear the voice, we see the expressions, we smell people, we touch people. All these things are extremely important and are not done when we have virtual contact.
Frans, there are a few questions from from the audience. One of these questions concerns dolphins and whales. What kind or how do they express their emotions?
Yeah, dolphins are, when Paul Ekman, the famous psychologist, worked on the facial expressions of humans and compared them with the primates, he was emphasizing the faces so much. And of course, a dolphin has no facial expressions. A dolphin doesn't have many muscles in the face. But in the dolphin, I would think, is the body posture and the sounds, especially. The vocalizations are very important. And science knows too little about the vocalizations of dolphins, because we know that they're complex. We also know that they change. If you give two dolphins, for example, a cooperative task in captivity, and they need to solve a problem together, their vocalizations change. So we know that they are communicating something that we don't know what it is. And so we know too little about the vocalizations of dolphins and whales. But I bet that's their main channel of emotional communication. Yeah.
Another question is, do primates understand human emotions? But I think that you already talk about that, but probably you make it more in detail now.
Yeah, I think since we are primates, our body language is very well understood by primates. And so sometimes with the chimpanzees, I have the impression that they know better how I feel than I do myself. It's a bit like some dogs are very good at reading human body language too. And so since the primates don't have language and your dog doesn't have language, all they know is body language, the tone of voice and your body posture and your movements. So they're extremely sensitive to it. They're actually more sensitive to it than we humans are. And I think for the primates, it's really not hard to read human emotions, because we are primates and we express them very similarly.
Do primates feel stress, and do they understand that other creatures around them, I mean conspecifics, are in stress?
Yeah, of course they can be stressed. They can be depressed, they can be stressed, they can be anxious. An interesting case that occurred recently at a Dutch zoo where we did some research. We had a female who lost her baby. No, the baby was dead born. So she lost her pregnancy, let's say. She had a dead born baby. And she was obviously, the female was obviously very depressed. That happens always. But the group that was interesting. We noticed that all the members of the group, they groomed her more. They stayed closer to her. They were much friendlier to her than usual. And so it's as if all the other chimpanzees in this large colony, they understood that she was stressed or depressed by the event. So yeah, they have these depressed reactions, and they respond to them also.
Have you ever heard, or probably you witnessed, some examples of natural reaction of primates to environmental catastrophes such as earthquakes or fire or whatever in the wild?
No, I don't know much about that. Is that there are descriptions of animals responding to earthquakes before humans even know that the earthquake happens. And so some animals, maybe elephants, who are very sensitive in their feet, they may notice these changes before we humans do. But I've not, no. Animals react, of course, to the environment. If it starts raining, for example, suddenly chimpanzees have a rain dance, as we call it. They start to display and they react to the rain. But it's not that they sense things that we cannot sense. That's usually not the case.
There is another question dealing with proto-religiosity of apes. For example, they mentioned in this question that you described something like that in chimps, but is there anything similar could be presented as an example in other species?
Yeah, chimpanzees have been known, I just mentioned the rain dance. They have been noticed also to display when they approach a waterfall with a lot of noise, and they start to display. So they have these reactions to natural phenomena that some people have compared to them believing in supernatural forces, maybe, or being affected by them. And there is an observation in the field of chimpanzees throwing rocks on a pile and displaying while they do. And some people have called that a sacred ritual. I'm not sure how close that gets us to human religion and human spirituality, but these connections are sometimes made. I don't know what to do with them. I don't think chimpanzees believe in God, but maybe they believe in supernatural powers. That's possible. Yeah.
The question is whether hunters-gatherers believe in God, because usually they believe in exactly supernatural power. Yeah, this is exactly the same before Christianity.
Yeah.
So maybe this is true not only for apes, but for our ancestors and even some traditional groups nowadays.
Yeah.
The question is, how do domestic animals know that something might happen, something bad might happen to their owners? For example, it is said that probably the owner does not know that something goes wrong with him, but his cat or a dog do not allow him to go outside, or for example, they force him to lay down, and then they locate themselves on their particular organ, which is so to say ill. In the owner.
Yeah, I would in those cases I would always think of natural causes first. So people sometimes think of telepathy and that kind of things, but it's very well possible that some animals, like dogs, they can smell if you have a cancer. And there's actually some evidence that they can do that. So if animals react this way and try to save their owner from dangers that the owner is not aware of, that doesn't mean that it's done by some sort of supernatural power of the animals. It's more like they have noticed something that the owner is not aware of, and the owner has not noticed it. So I usually would think of natural causes, because the senses of animals are different than ours. And so smell, for example, the dog has a smell, he smells 100 times better than humans, and the elephant smells 100 times better than a dog. So you can imagine that an elephant can smell things that you're totally unaware of. Yeah. Or you have the echolocation of the dolphins who can basically, if you're in the water with dolphins, they can, for example, sense if you're pregnant or not, because they can notice that with their echolocation system. Yeah.
Do they feel, do they understand the phenomena of death?
Well, I think animals understand the death of others.
Yes, of course, not
And
themselves.
they have a very strong reaction to the death of somebody else. And sometimes they're very affected by the death of somebody else. But whether they can extrapolate from that to themselves and say, well, this is one day going to happen to me, which is a sense of mortality, we have no evidence for that. It's possible that they do, but I have never seen evidence for that.
But I can such a feeling that probably this is really our own attitude, that we are deadly afraid of death, because in many traditional societies the reaction is completely different. Because when I would ask my other friends something about that, they would be a bit amazed. What is wrong with that? So one day each of us will gone or passed away. So what's wrong with that? Why should we think about that? They say. Now we have to think about now. We have to feel comfortable now. We have to feel happy if there are reasons to be happy now. So what's the sense to see something which will happen where we do not know when?
Yeah.
So maybe they are more smart than we.
Yeah. Well, because we worry about it, and they don't.
They don't worry.
Yeah.
Okay, Galia, I think that we are close to finish. Probably you want to say something to our audience, because your books, and this is not the only book which been translated in Russia, are really, really popular. My students love them, and they ask many questions about your book when I'm teaching on etology, human etology, and evolution of behavior. So they are really inspired by your writings.
Okay, well, I'm at the moment, because of the Corona crisis, I have a lot of time to write, of course, because I'm basically stuck at home. So I'm writing a book on gender.
Oh, great.
And
sex or gender? I mean biological sex.
On gender, on gender, on human gender, and how it relates to primate sex. Because the sexes are very different in the primates, and I think they're very different in humans. So I thought I picked a topic that is not controversial, which is gender. But it's a very difficult topic. But there is so much material. If you look at the primates, if you look at, let's say, chimpanzees or bonobos, that's my main comparison, are the chimps and the bonobos. It's so interesting to look at the people have the impression that in the primates you have a male boss and he's the boss over all the females. That's how primates are organized. That's how they think. But in most primates, the society is basically females, and the females their life is basically independent of the males. Of course, the males come in on occasion, and the males are sometimes physically dominant over them. But their lives are not determined by the males. They have their own lives and their own offspring and so on. And so I try to explain that this whole view of you have a male boss and the females have to obey, which is how people look at primates, is incorrect, and that the sexes have a much more complex relationship in the primates.
Okay, thank you very much. Pity that we have to finish, because this is really a pleasure to meet with you again. And I do hope that probably one day, now when you are retired, you will be more free and come to see us, and we can spend more time after Corona, of course.
Yeah, I'd love to come to Moscow another time. Yeah, sure.
Now it's much better. You would enjoy staying here. It's completely different city compared to that time when you were here.
Okay,
so
good.
Welcome.
Okay, good.
Thank you very much.
Nice seeing everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Ребята,